This is the ComMarker B6 20-watt fiber laser. ComMarker sent this over to the channel for review because some of you were asking in the comments, how does this thing stack up against the Monport GA60? I'll start off by saying these are two entirely different machines. Aside from the fact that they are both fiber lasers, this is a 20-watt fiber laser with 150 millimeter field lens on it, so you get about a 6-inch area of engraving. The Monport GA60 has 175 millimeter field lens on it, so you get a slightly bigger engraving area, plus it's a MOPA fiber laser, which means you get access to control quite a bit more settings, and those capabilities give you a little bit more control over what you're able to change as far as the settings. At the end of the day, that means more time dialing in what you are engraving on. Right out of the box, the ComMarker B6 comes with 4 individual pieces. You have your base here, which is the power supply unit, which can be set off to the side or set up in this configuration like I have it now. On top of the base plate goes your engraving surface with threaded inserts for M5 screws to set up things like reference points or some jigs like we're going to take a look at in the next couple of minutes. So whether you use the machine with the base plate sitting on top of the power supply unit, or you use the power supply unit down underneath your table or in a separate location to keep the fan noise at bay, the machine works exactly the same way. You have your riser arm here with an included USB-C power port on the side that attaches directly to the machine and then to this laser unit itself up top. The machine has a touchscreen on the top with full autofocus, so no need to use this little knob here to dial things in, although you can if you should so choose, and for some situations you may actually get a better engraving if you defocus it or pull it out of focus a little bit from what is the standard autofocus focal distance. The machine has some ports on the back here for a rotary, your foot pedal, and an enclosure, which is an optional add-on that they sell on their website. While I do have the foot pedal here, it's not something that I've tested out so far, and I don't have a rotary or the enclosure kit for this machine. Now, I haven't gone to the ends of the earth testing this machine out. My time here is primarily focused on doing things surrounding 3D printers. But I did test it out with some of the stuff that ComMarker sent over for us to engrave, such as dog tags, and we used one of my friend Sam's jigs for that. We used a lot of his jigs in this video actually, but they also sent over some brass coins that I tested out. Came out pretty cool doing a depth map engraving of my logo. They also sent over a couple of round steel plates that I tested some engravings on, but the main thing that I was curious about was 3D printed parts. That is the majority of what I use the Monport GA60 for, so that was what I was most curious about when going to use this machine. How does it engrave 3D printed parts? Now, when I went to engrave some of the 3D printed parts with the ComMarker B6, I was pleasantly surprised because I had to change all of one setting around, and I had to do it once. With the Monport GA60, I spent a few hours, if not longer, trying to change some of the Q-pulse settings along with the frequency and the power settings and the speed, because they all combine together to give you your perfect engraving. With this machine, you have control over the power, speed, and frequency. Now, the frequency range on the B6 is much lower than what you get on something like the MOPA fiber laser. You range from 20 kilohertz to 60 kilohertz, which means there's only a 40 kilohertz window that you can actually mess with. Where on a machine like the Monport GA60, I think you can go all the way from 20 kilohertz, possibly even lower, all the way up to 400. And Q-pulse settings, playing around with all of that stuff, really made for an interesting first attempt at engraving 3D printed parts. And that machine was also my first fiber laser that I've ever used, so it made for an interesting first couple of hours, to say the least. With this machine, I powered it on, got it into focal distance, and that was pretty much that. I changed the settings to match what I had on the Monport, aside from the Q-pulse. The frequency and the power settings for the most part were exactly the same. I just didn't have to spend all of that time messing around with frequency and Q-pulse. So my opinion is, right out of the box, if you're brand new to fiber lasers or laser engraving in general and want to get a machine that's capable of doing things like brass or even engraving on 3D printed parts, the ComMarker B6 is a very good contender. Not only is this machine much easier right out of the box to get set up and working if you're new to fiber lasers, but it also comes in less than half the price of a machine like the Monport GA60. Because it's half the price, you get a smaller engraving area. You don't have quite as many adjustments that you can play around with. And there's obviously the big difference. This is a 20-watt fiber laser, and the Monport is a 60-watt fiber laser. So a lot more power over on the Monport for engraving faster with things like aluminum or steel. This will still do it. You're just going to need more passes to get through it. Now, with many things in life, bigger is not always better. With the ComMarker, the 20-watt fiber laser is more comparable to something you would see on that of an X-Tool F1, and really the only thing you have to worry about is adjusting your speed to get the perfect engraving. Now, like I mentioned before, you do have capabilities of changing the frequency, and that will come into play depending on what you're engraving, but for the most part, because it's such a limited range, you will not spend that much time dialing in the settings, and Lightburn has a material test. You can basically press run material test, and depending on what you want to do, I typically go for power and speed. Once we get our power and speed dialed in, then we can play around with the frequency depending on what material we're using. When I was using the Monport GA60, there was power and speed, and then frequency and Q pulse, but then there was power and Q pulse, and power and frequency, and it made for a long introduction to fiber lasers. Now, I use that machine quite a bit. It's set up for engraving some of the products that I make. But I would say right out of the box, if I had received this machine first, it would have been a far quicker introduction into the world of fiber lasers. That, and again, this thing comes in at a much cheaper price. As far as some of the engravings that I did, I tested it with 3D printed parts, brass. They even sent over some aluminum and stainless steel that I was able to engrave. I didn't test it out on a whole lot more than that, but the results that I was able to get from the materials that they sent along with this, and that's another thing that I wanted to point out. They sent a whole bunch of materials for us to test out with this. And I don't think that was just because they were sending it to me. I think that's what you get when you purchase this machine. So you can dial in your settings and get the things figured out. The aluminum business cards that they sent over with this were far thicker than the ones that they sent with the Monport. The Monport business cards that were included with the laser were pretty thin and left a little bit to be desired. So I mean, these business cards, I guess I don't have a good way of actually showing it off to you, but they're much thicker and they spring right back. I don't have my calipers with me right now, but I would venture to say these are, 0.15 or 0.2 millimeters even, whereas the ones that came with the Monport were probably a tenth of that. Very, very thin, almost paper thin. Still aluminum, but very thin. They sent 5 or 6 of each color, so we've got kind of this golden bronze color, and then they also sent the standard black business cards. And as I mentioned before, they also sent over some fairly thick brass challenge coins. So I used a service online to convert my logo to a depth map image. We were able to engrave it on the machine. That is what all of that dust is there. That's from the brass engraving off. Now this process was my very first attempt at engraving on to the brass coins. It took about an hour and 28 minutes, an hour and a half, and I could have gone longer. I probably should have gone longer, but the results were still pretty good. Not a whole lot of depth to this one, but there is still a lip there that you can see, and you can actually kind of see the layer lines is what I'm going to call them. Now I do have the back side to this coin as well as both sides on this coin. So if you're interested in checking out how to convert an image into a depth map and engrave one for yourself onto a brass challenge coin, leave me a comment down below and we can do that in a future video. As I mentioned before, they did send over some stainless steel plates, so I ran a material test on the back of one of them so I could get my settings dialed in. And for this one, I had my frequency set at the top end of 60 kilohertz, and all I did was a power and speed test. And you can see the results right here. Didn't take much to get it dialed in and figure out exactly which settings I needed to use to get a good looking engraving on the other side. Hi Sam. In a future video, we will be putting the ComMarker B6 to the test against the Monport GA60, and this is where you guys come in. What do you want me to test? I'm open to buying a couple different materials. My buddy Sam over at Samcraft sent over a bunch of his jigs for us to use on both the fiber lasers. So I will be purchasing some flashlights, some bottle openers, business cards, and some slate coasters to test on. But what do you want me to put on there? If you are a member of my Patreon page, I will have a community post up there for you guys to give recommendations as to what you would like to see. I'm also open to engraving some stuff for you and sending it on down the road so you guys can feature it in your day-to-day business or feature it in your shops. To be eligible for that, you will have to be a Patreon member, and I will have a link for that down in the description below. If you are a current member of my Patreon, head on over there and there will be a community post for you guys to check out and leave some of your suggestions. I will also be pulling suggestions from the YouTube comments, but Patreon will get top priority. And I will also be using Patreon members to get their logos and some images to engrave. So if you'd like your own branding on some stuff, head on over to the Patreon page and follow the instructions there on sending me some of your images. That's going to do it for this one, just the initial overview and look at the ComMarker B6 20-watt fiber laser. I want to give a huge thank you to ComMarker for reaching out and sending over the B6 fiber laser. Let me know down in the comments below what you want to see me engrave on it next. And until next time, folks, take care.